to Fast Market on the TD Ameritrade Network. I'm Tom White, and I'm joined by my co-host Kevin Hinks. But let's bring in our next guest, and that's going to be Megan Brantley, the Vice President of Research at LikeFolio.com. Hey, thanks for joining us today, Megan. Great topic to be covering ahead of earnings is Apple. And by the way, I haven't seen you on the show since I started re-hosting, so I'm kind of bummed about that. I got to put up with Landon and Andy on a daily basis. That's not the best outcome, but glad you're here. Give us a rundown on Apple. It's underperformed the overall market so far, but making some ground up today, just below those all-time highs. What are you seeing on data on Apple? Because getting these products in people's hands has been a problem because there's some delays.
Yeah, so whenever we look at Apple, I feel like there's so many different things that we can talk about. Whenever we were trying to, nail down the charts that we were going to use today, there were 10 different options that we could choose from because this is a beast, right? And so when we look at this a big picture perspective, so all of the different ways that at least English speakers could be talking about engaging with Apple, whether they're buying an iPhone, whether they're watching Ted Lasso, whether they just got a new Apple TV, all of these things. And what we see just overall is a general kind of slowdown. Now, I will say our mentions tilt heavier to the iPhones, the iPads, the Macs of the world, these big devices that people like to talk about. And we saw, huge growth last year as people were working from home, as people were, looking for different ways to engage, and they were picking up those devices, especially the iPads and the Macs. And now we see kind of a comparative slowdown. And so I would say that our data looks muted, but you have to consider this looks muted for Apple, right? This is still a tremendous in terms of purchase intent volume that we're registering every day. But overall, you can see that green line. Those are those purchase intent mentions. And overall, I guess on a year-over-year basis, that growth, it just looks like it's slowing down. I think that's pretty evident to the far right of the chart. So heading into this earnings release, our data is definitely tilting to the downside.
Megan, that is fascinating in terms of your data because there's so much news around Apple lately in so many different categories, and not to mention privacy and everything that they've disrupted in the last 10 days with privacy, which really started with Snap's earnings. So what do you think? What is the part, if your numbers are disappointing for Apple, what is it that's disappointing? Are there parts that are disappointing? Is it the whole pie in general that's disappointing? Because they always come out with some new thing that's going to be doing better than others, like the services, like the wearables. Yeah. What part of LikeFolio's data is struggling here, Megan?
I think that one way to look at it is there's a sense of just normalization of Apple is so ingrained in our daily lives. It's almost like there's less buzz generated around these new products. And so it's just kind of accepted that a lot of times people will upgrade. When we look at these upgrading mentions specifically, those look pretty consistent with the last year. So you still have this loyal group of consumers who are buying these products. But in general, I think the biggest contributor to our data specifically is that iPhone release. We saw a little bit of a muted reaction to the new iPhone lineup. I think that in general, consumers just have really, really high expectations for Apple, and so they expect these really tremendous leaps in technology. And yes, the iPhone is certainly improving, but I think that this is just the standard now. This is just the expectation. So that bar just keeps getting higher and higher for Apple to clear. I think this chart is really interesting though because it shows one thing that Apple is doing well. And so it's keeping those consumers happy. Whenever you look at the year-over-year change in happiness, this is a key metric because you see these key items, the iPhone, the Mac, the iPad, even this Apple TV, those are showing year-over-year improvements. So, consumers are still happy and consumers are still loyal. There was just a little less buzz around this specific lineup. I think that there just wasn't maybe as much perceived innovation from consumers this year.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned Ted Lasso, Megan. That is the best show on TV, in my humble opinion. Everybody should be watching it because you got to believe. But if you take a look at the mentions as far as, maybe the services side of their business, which continues to grow, what kind of data are you seeing as far as services go and happiness or positive data there?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because services are increasingly more important for Apple. I think the services segment comprises around 20% or over 20% of their revenue. And you can see these are the mentions of people who are actually using an Apple service. And so we're, ranging from Apple Music, maybe that Apple TV Plus, Apple Pay, the iCloud. And what you can see that, that's a nice trend line. You look at those mentions and those are definitely higher versus 2019, but there's a little bit of tempering just from the massive growth that was recorded last year. So I think overall, our data, this is a case of, Apple this is still a really strong company, and this is still a company that is growing. It's just maybe it's not growing as fast as it was last year.
Kev, did you have another question there for Megan real quick?
Yeah, I got one more. Megan, when you look at your happiness chart, this is the one that really gets you, right? Because I know my gut reaction, my knee-jerk reaction when I saw this was to go through a little checklist. Let's see. Yep, Apple TV. Yep, just started watching. iPhone. Yep, just got a new one. Macintosh, got a new one. iPad, got a new one. Apple Watch. No, I didn't get a new one, but I've got one. And AirPods. Yes, I got a new one. So I'm like 5 of 6, Megan, and I'm 100. And I'm 5 of 6. How could someone like in the prime not be at least 5 for 6 if I'm 5 for 6? So aren't some of that lingering still going to be there? I know we're in kind of an off year for the iPhone in terms of upgrades, right? It was last year was a big one, but so many of these things are doing so well. How is it that we can't look at this in a positive tone?
I mean, I think that you definitely can make a case for that. I think that it's undeniable to say that, Apple is not necessarily doing well. I think Apple's doing very well. Apple's a beast. It's just, are they going to be able to clear the high bar? I don't know. I look at us as we're sitting here talking, and both of us have matching, I think, Apple headphones in. I have my iPhone sitting right here on the desk. I've got my Apple Watch on that's, buzzing as we speak, because we're so ingrained in this Apple ecosystem. And I think that's one thing that Apple does really well. And this, from a long-term perspective, this happiness chart is really, really important because it shows that Apple is able to continue to keep consumers and make them happy. One chart I don't think that we've had a chance to talk about is the mention of people who are, switching to Android devices. That's always something that people ask us about, and we just don't see that. We see, those mentions of people who are talking about leaving the Apple platform actually falling. And when we look at mentions of people who are saying, you know what, I think I'm going to enter this Apple ecosystem. I'm going to switch to an iPhone. Those have actually increased by 5%. I think Landon is one of the recent converts to Apple, and so we're so excited here at LikeFolio because he's finally, our group messages are finally all blue, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that showcases the power that Apple has. Just from our data perspective, we see a little bit of a slowdown, and so from an earnings score perspective, our earnings score definitely trends more on the bearish side just for this event. But long term, we're definitely excited to see how these different devices perform, especially into the holiday season.
Yeah, and we had that same kind of sentiment yesterday on Amazon ahead of their earnings after the close also. But if you look at that, and you mentioned the conversion to Android or maybe getting off Apple, I look at that, the loyalty that Apple product users have at this point. Kevin, you could probably remember 5-10 years ago when you got an Apple product, you always thought about, hey, maybe I'll get an Android, maybe it's just as good. I just don't see that anymore. Is that part of the lure that Apple has, is their high loyalty rate?
Yeah, I think that's one thing. Not only are these Apple users loyal, but that pot is growing. The people who are switching into Apple really enjoy it. I think that Apple has a sense whenever we look at the tweets that things just work. Whenever I got my AirPods in, I literally opened up the case and everything automatically synced almost like magic. And so I think that that's kind of that sense whenever you can create that user experience. That's why you see those improvements in happiness. And that's why you see, more people receptive to Apple and to Apple's ecosystem.
Yep. They've got you wrapped up if you're an Apple user, that's for sure. And I just got a new pair of those headphones, too. And it did connect to everything like magic. All right, Megan, thanks for the rundown here on Apple.
Thank you guys for having me. I've missed y'all.
Yeah, good. We missed you, too. All right, that's Megan Brantley, the VP of Research at LikeFolio.com.